right, and we are live.
I want to thank you all for attending our town hall meeting today. We have a lot of things to talk about today, a lot of things we'll be discussing. This year is a very important election for us, and we must all look at what we are, who are we going to vote for, and the importance of the vote. Today, our Equal Justice Now Town Hall is with the Urban League Young Professionals, and we want to welcome you and thank you all for attending. I would like to introduce our moderator today, who really needs no introduction at all, the Honorable Judge Mathis. He's an activist, longtime activist for Rainbow Push. He has an award-winning TV show. Judge Mathis, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And let me begin by saying I'm very appreciative of you having my involvement. This is an area that I've been engaged in my entire adult life. And so I know a little bit about these things. And my first observation would be that all of the progress we've made, including emancipation from slavery, has been an effect or had an effect on our voting rights. For example, much of the issue involving slavery and secession from the Union involved the number of votes that would be counted in the North and the South parts of the country. In other words, we were defined as 3/4 of a human being. And that meant that our votes only would count upon emancipation for only 3/4. And so much of that was to determine whether we would have a one man, one vote if and when emancipation came. And then we came to the Civil Rights era. Well, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were all as a result of public opinion, which turned the vote toward from Republican to Democrat for the most part among African Americans. For example, prior to the Civil Rights Act, and this is the progress we've made, 2/3 of our people were in poverty. Well, some 25 years later, after the Civil Rights Act, it was a 360-degree turn. 25% in poverty as it persists now, a little less, and 75% working, middle, and upper class incomes for African Americans. And then you had the Voting Rights Act, of 1965. Well, much of the opinion, public opinion, and thereby votes were changed and influenced, as we know, by the late, great march coordinated by John Lewis, our hero that just left us. And it was a fact that prior to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we only had 1,000 Black elected officials. Now there's over 15,000. And indeed, less than 50 years after the after the Voting Rights Act, not only did we have 15,000 elected officials, we also took over the presidency. So I would suggest to you that voting has had a significant impact on every step of our progress. And equal justice police brutality in particular, is one of the avenues one of the things we've been able to overcome through our vote. Ferguson, Missouri, for example. In 2014, when Mike Brown was killed and we had a mass protest, one of the push was to register and to vote, because at that time, the African-American community was the overwhelming majority of the voting population. Yet we only voted in the numbers less than 10% we accounted for the vote. Well, the next election, we registered the citizens of Ferguson. We had voter registration campaigns. People from all over the country went and engaged that community and registered our brothers and sisters in Ferguson. We then had 2 council people. Well, now the good news is we have the first Black mayor in Ferguson, Missouri. We have the majority of city council when we had none when Mike Brown was killed. Now we have the majority. We've replaced the prosecutor who we know was negligent in his responsibility to administer justice. And so it is that our voting has made a difference in every single step of the way. And as it has been, it is now that our vote is going to, once again, make a difference in the progress that we make toward equal justice. And with that, I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. I'm going to start with Mir Harris. She specializes in creative strategy and marketing. Mir's resume includes consulting for Nickelodeon, Disney, Universal, Anderson, POC, Sister Aiko, the Grammy Awards, and various lifestyle brands. Mir also continues to use her voice to fight for injustices and became the first official hire for Time's Up in 2018. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
We also have from the Urban League Young Professionals, of which I was a member in my days of youth back in Detroit. And Andrew is a council member on the North Westwood Neighborhood Council, where he represents consultants in West Los Angeles, which includes the UCLA campus, the historic Westwood Village Business District, and the UCLA Medical Center. Andrew currently serves as the Los Angeles Urban League Young Professionals Civil Engagement Political Chair. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. Andrew? Is Andrew with us? It doesn't appear he is. Okay, now we'll go to Trell. Trell is with us. Trell Thomas. Trell is a media expert and activist. His work spans from career beginnings at NBC and on the historic Obama presidential campaign in 2008. Some of his current work includes spearheading and Still Vote initiatives like the Open Letter to Congress in support of the HEROES Act, as well as other voting initiatives. Thank you for joining us, Trell.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello, everybody.
Now we have Tai Savet. Tai is a professional real estate broker specializing in serving the particular needs of his clients from Ventura, Malibu, and throughout the west side of Los Angeles, including Beverly Hills and Hollywood. Tai is currently producing and starring in his second season of the VH1 hit reality series, Love and Listings. Thank you for joining us, Tai.
It's an honor to be here.
And then, of course, we have the man of the hour who brought us all together, Brother Tony Smith. He's the co-founder of Equal Justice Now and an activist of many years. Thank you for joining us, Tony.
Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate
Putting
it.
this all together as co-sponsor.
Appreciate everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to begin, go right into our initial introductory remarks. We are going to begin with, they have listed in the order, with Andrew Lewis, who's not with us. So we're going to skip Andrew, and we're going to start with Trell. Brother Trell, why don't you give us your opening remarks, which we'd like to confine to 10 minutes.
Sure. Once again, thank you so much for having me. An honor to be here, an honor to be on a panel moderated by you, Judge Mathis, so I'm very, very grateful. You know, in your introduction, you spoke a lot about turnout and voting, and that is specifically what I want to focus on, especially when it pertains to the Black vote. Black turnout grew in 2008 to 2012, but it went down in 2016, and is nowhere near full participation now. But we have to keep in mind that people of color are becoming the new majority, and if we vote, we have the power to win. I know that in the last couple of years, Black people don't have lost a little bit of faith in the electoral system. But we've got to encourage our family, our friends, our loved ones to register and make a voting plan. And I'll tell you why. Black people are actively being suppressed to prevent us from voting. I mean, we saw what just happened in Kentucky. Since the Shelby versus Holder case, states have implemented ID laws, registration barriers, lack of staffing, and other tactics to stop our ability to vote with ease. But we know that local leaders, ballot initiatives, policies impact the Black communities most directly, from city representatives to courts. We have the ability to impact our day-to-day beyond the presidential election. Voting locally is just as important as voting nationally, and I can't stress that enough. We have to make sure that we are voting locally, because that affects everything from what's happening to us economically, to the police brutality that we have been enduring. All of those things, all of those appointments are elected appointments, and we have to make sure to make that connection and get out and vote. What I can say is that Black women's turnout has increased year to year, and we must support Black women during this time and show up to vote too. So if you're not doing it because people have died for us to do it, if you're not doing it because you believe that it will make a change, do it to support your mother, to support your grandmother, to support your aunt, your sister, who has been showing up for us year after year. They are a powerful voting bloc, and if we get on board with them, we can make a difference. The next thing that I want to say is that conservatives are threatening resources and opportunities for Black success through housing, through education, food access, environment, economic security. We know, if the last couple of months has taught us anything, that we know that it's all systematic, and it starts with the vote. So there are people and policies that impact each of those areas, and our vote helps guide those benefits. Now, I know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I also want to say this. I want to stress the importance of absentee voting, voting by mail. Every state has different voting rules, including who can vote absentee or not. So resources like www.vote.org can help you really navigate that system. So right now, just take the time to write it down, vote.org. They can help you navigate that, because we must know our state rules. For example, in California, it's open to any registered voter to vote without any excuse as absentee and submit ballot by mail. In other states, age, health, ability, all play a part. So you gotta look into it, do the research based on your state, and know what applies to you. It's really, really important, and vote.org can help you do that. Collectively, Black people don't traditionally vote by mail. With COVID impacting Black folks so rapidly, it should be a free option for everyone. And which brings me to my last point of the HEROES Act that Judge Mathis mentioned. The HEROES Act is pushing for funding to have every state have the ability to vote by mail. And this is so, so important. Right now, I was able to spearhead a project with Ms. Tina Knowles Lawson and a bunch of very powerful and amazing Black women in Hollywood to push Senator Mitch McConnell to pass the HEROES Act, which would provide $3.6 billion for funding. That would buy machines that we need. That would get the right staffing. That would provide the paper to print on. And people don't think about all those things, but it's really important. And there's a petition right now that you can sign by going to andstillIvote.org /heroes to be able to sign that petition to help us push this through. It's really important. Our lives are depending on our vote, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Let me now, one of the most significant things I heard Trell say is that Black women have been on the front line for every struggle we've engaged in, whether it's civil rights and now voting rights and voting at the ballot booth. And so I want to go now to Mir. We should have gone to her first, since Black women are leading the way. And quite frankly, brothers, it's a sad commentary on our activism that Black women are leading the way. On the one hand, our brothers have this super macho sense of superiority over women, yet the women are the ones that have fought and led the way in recent decades in achieving equal justice and empowering our community. And so it is that, brothers, we got a lot of catching up to do with these sisters. And I'd like to have Mir tell us more about voting rights and her initiatives, as well as what she's doing with the organization, which has done so much work in our community. Time's up.
Oh, well, thank you for that, both of you gentlemen, and thank you for the acknowledgement of the work that women of color in particular do in leading most of these movements. I want to kind of spin off of what Trell was speaking to in terms of voting and the importance of how it affects everything, particularly one of the conversations that we've been seeing prevalent in the media right now in terms of social justice and police brutality. Several women-led organizations like the Movement for Black Lives, like Black Lives Matter, are really doing work, particularly in areas of the Black Census Project that just happened. There are a lot of our communities and a lot of our voices that are left out of the conversation that are affected the most, right? And that is why the importance of voting is so prevalent right now as we're seeing everything kind of crumble apart, because it literally affects every facet of where dollars are spent, of who represents us in these prevalent conversations. And so I wanted to start today by breaking down exactly what we mean when we talk about social justice. Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities, not just the wealthy, not just the affluent, not just the well-educated, not just white, not just those with power. Because of the history and the legacy in this country to devalue and divide and segregate people of color put in disproportionately underserved environments and communities. And as a result, it creates this cycle of oppression and systematic racism that makes the American dream unattainable. So we've seen these movements rise up, whereas Time's Up, for instance, was the first attempt at intersectional feminism, because the first round of feminism was built on the backs of women of color who were typically the domestic workers or the home nurturers and the nannies and the maids. This time around, there was a more concerted effort to pay attention to the intersectionality of how, even as individuals, we were torn, right? As a woman, a Black woman, I'm a woman, of course, but in this country, I'm often Black first, right? And can empathize with my communities and my men of color more so than per se white women, for instance. But I say that to say, we've seen a lot happen lately in terms of how the militarization of the police systems and of our communities and the disproportionate spending that is happening there is affecting the results of everything else, right? So you may have heard recently a lot of conversation about defunding the police. And while some would like to paint a picture of a lawless country or complete mayhem, that's actually not what it means at all. Across the country, for instance, police departments are overly padded. They have overly padded budgets that sometimes take up 40 to 60% of a city or a county's entire budget. This has been to the detriment and undermining of critical programs and institutions in our communities, such as hospitals, which we are seeing, in clinics, which we are seeing in the current pandemic, or schooling, or housing for that matter. And while there has been a decline in enriching our communities, there's been a focused effort on militarizing police forces with more weaponry, more gear, more resources, and very little training. To make matters worse, women, particularly trans women, are often disproportionately victimized within those situations. These police are not often from or don't live in these communities that they police, which makes de-escalation tactics non-existent. Black and brown communities are over-policed and the victims of police brutality at higher levels than any other groups. Yet we pay the salaries of these officers. We are electing the DAs and the chiefs of police and the sheriffs and the judges in our neighborhoods and our communities. And because of this, they're getting upwards to $100 billion a year on policing and another $80 billion a year on jails and prisons, which also, most of us know, once you're arrested, once you're a convicted felon, you lose your ability to vote. You almost become, again, to Judge Mathis's point earlier, being 3/5 of a human being, you become not even a full-fledged citizen within, our voting rights and our constitutional rights. Because the spending is happening disproportionately and not giving more of these monies to our mental health programs, which is oftentimes a lot of the root of this over-policing, or our additional schooling programs, after school enrichment programs. You have a population that is not fortified or enriched in ways to avoid, and you have a policing system and a jailing system and a prison system, which is actually not proven to work or rehabilitate. It's feeding a deeper level of systemic racism within our communities and in our populace. And even though, for instance, Black people are 13% of the national population, we are in these systems upwards of 40%, and growing, particularly with women of color and young women. So the importance of voting is now probably more prevalent than it's ever been in our country's history, because we're seeing a reckoning, right? We're seeing our population being disadvantaged, as well as not enough participation to equal out the playing field. So it is important that we do tap into all of the resources that we have, to educate ourselves, to not just vote on the national level, but the local level, and to really pay attention to how we are governed and who is representing us in these conversations, for the better welfare of all of us.
Okay. Thank you. And one of the things I'd like to take notice and perhaps add on, and that is Mir's comment that we're spending so much, and the amounts that she disclosed we're spending on the criminal justice system. I like to use the term education over incarceration as an advocacy. Indeed, in the last 40 years, our education budget has barely kept up with the rate of inflation, while our incarceration budget, the prison and corrections budget, has went up 300%. And then we have, where I'm from in Michigan, the second largest line item on the statewide budget under Medicaid and Medicare is the corrections budget. Then comes the education budget. So I suggest, and I thank you for bringing that point out, that we increase more in certainly education over incarceration, and then in community policing. Lastly, regarding that, as you discussed, Mayor, when I worked for the mayor of Detroit, the first Black mayor, he won because he was campaigned against police brutality, Mayor Coleman Young. When he was elected, I was appointed to operate 12 neighborhood city halls, each of which had what we referred to as neighborhood precincts, not the regular large precinct, but the neighborhood precinct was inside of each city hall. And we squelched police brutality almost immediately and kept it that way for many years. So I thank you, Mayor, for bringing out those very specific observations that we have and that we must move forward on. Thank you. Now I'd like to move and hear from our dear brother. All of us are brothers except for me. I don't know how much I like that. But I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go to Tai Savet, brother Tai.
All right. Well, first off, I think everybody, is doing amazing. I'm listening to from their perspectives and being educated myself. With that, when I was asked to do this panel in the beginning, I wasn't sure what to speak about. But doing what I do in real estate, I see a lot of controversial things that happen in our job. The first is gentrification and what that really is. So a lot of times, in my business, in the areas I work, I'm not a privy to seeing certain low income areas. So for me, I had to educate myself. So last week when I asked the guy to speak on this panel, I was educating myself. And I think that stems for a lot of agents that work in the arenas that I work in, which is high-end areas. We tend to overlook and not understand. But when I started doing some research in it, I started agreeing with what's really out there. And the gentrification vote you know, with investors and high income people buying out these areas and pushing people away, I feel that there's a disadvantage for low income. And I was doing some research that really kind of struck me, that the people that have certain areas, say West Adams, right? These people can't afford to live in these areas, because what's happening is these investors are making it so expensive that they can't even afford, you know, to purchase in these areas. So my perspective versus somebody else's perspective is going to be completely different. But I think that what we're doing is we're making it almost intolerable for somebody to really move into an area that was, say, you know, I don't even know where I want to say with this, but, and I have to be very careful, but I would say this. I would say that we, the people, have to take back certain areas, and we have to maintain areas. We have to be more educated on these areas, and we have to, you know, be knowledgeable, you know, about financing and how to buy. And I think there's a lack of that. I don't know if you guys want to add to this, but, you know.
Thank you, Tai.
Yeah,
I was going to add to it, but you go ahead and proceed.
What I can say about this, when I came up with the idea of the show Love and Listings, it was because a majority of my clients are African-American, right? And a majority of my friends are African-American. Great people, you know. A lot of times too is you see the $1 million listings, the Bravos and out there, and you think of, you know, one stereotype. Well, in my reality, it wasn't that. It was, you know, all different nationalities. And I wanted to come up with something that was realistic and what happened in real life. And, you know, give opportunity for other eyeballs to be viewed on different nationalities. So I'll say this, you know, what you see on the TV shows, there is drama, there's all of that, but there is African-American doing a lot of business. And some of my best friends are doing crazy amount of business. And, you know, I'm glad that they're highlighted in it.
Yeah. Thank you, Tai. Let me say, add on to that, if you will, that gentrification in any manner could be a losing proposition for African Americans or those who are being gentrified. But on the other hand, if we have compassionate leadership in government, we can also reduce the amount of gentrification, which in fact, as you said, moves our vote around. In New Jersey, Newark in particular, one of the most interesting approaches was Mayor at that time, Booker, U.S. Senator and former Mayor Booker of Newark. At that time, when gentrification came his way, one of the things he required was what we call a TIFA, that is a tax increment finance authority, whereby it's a particular district, when you see it gentrifying, you have an ordinance, a city ordinance, that requires that they put money into this tax incremental finance authority. The developers must put money into it to help offset the increase in taxes that the current residents have and the home repair that will be required to keep up with the new and renovated housing in that community. That allowed many people to stay in their homes. And so those are the kind of innovative things we can do to address gentrification, because we know when we leave, we are in many instances leaving our vote behind. And secondly, we're going into economic decline, because most of the areas that are being gentrified are possessed by folks who've owned their homes and perhaps have paid them all off, and they move into rented places or new mortgages. And lastly, myself, I left my community as a victim of gentrification, or victimizing them with gentrification. And it was a majority white community in Detroit, the most prosperous community in the Detroit metropolitan area. But when I moved to California, I left my vote behind. That vote could have made perhaps a difference in the local school board races, which many people don't know of and don't vote for. I had in previous elections, and the vote was very low. But my vote did make a difference in school board elections, as we talk about the down ballot. And so it is that, yes, gentrification when people move, they leave their vote behind, and depending on the area that they move into, they either dilute their vote or they empower their vote. Thank you very much, Tai, for bringing those things out. Very valuable information. And I believe we've exhausted the panelists' comments, and we're going to now proceed into the question and answer, Tony, or which way are we going now? I see social justice and police brutality listed as well as HB 10. What would we like for our panelists? Are we going into a second round of discussion, or are we allowing our panelists to go to a question and answer or a cross conversation?
I think Mir was going to discuss police brutality.
Okay, proceed, Mir.
I already touched on it, but I'm happy to share some more statistics, unless you guys wanted to.
Please do. Please do.
Sure.
We want to hear from the women who do the work. We want to hear from the person who does the work. No offense, fellas.
So as we've been seeing this year, on average, the police are killing about 1,000 people a year over the past 5 years, murdering Black people at 4 times the rate of white people. Black women were the group most likely to be killed when unarmed, and young Black men are 21 times more likely to be killed by police than any other group. A quarter to half of police killings involve someone who is or is perceived to be in a mental health crisis. A law enforcement officer is caught in the act of sexual violence every 5 days, a figure widely understood to be a gross underestimate of the prevalence of police sexual violence, which is the second most frequent reported form of police violence after excessive force. Over 10 million arrests are made each year, many accompanied by physical, sexual, verbal violence or abuse, irrevocably changing the course of millions of lives. Over 73 million people, or 1 in 3 people in the US, currently have a criminal record. So to Judge Mathis's point of education over incarceration, we actually have the highest incarceration rate in the entire world, and are spending more money on it than anything else. Black people, like I mentioned, represent 13% of the population, but a quarter of those arrests annually, and 28% of people arrested multiple times since 2017. 1 in 3 Black men can expect to be arrested before the age of 23 years old. Of those that are arrested 3 or more times in a year, 42% were Black. Half reported incomes less than $10,000. So as you can see from those statistics alone, if we were divesting and reorganizing funds within these communities to be enriching in schools, to be fundamentally supporting our communities with community center outreach, mental health resources, de-escalation training even in neighborhood policing services, we would be lowering these numbers substantially, as well as keeping these people within our voting community to affect the laws that are governing us, the people that are governing us, and the effects of the spending on our local communities across the nation.
Thank you, Mir. One of the things I think should be pointed out from Mir's analysis is that, yes, we represent 13% of the population as a people, but we represent 6% of the population as Black men. There are more Black women than there are men. And so the more dramatic statistic is that we represent nearly half the prison population, but only 6% of the general population. That is shameful. That is shameful, and we should not talk much about the incarceration or the human rights violations in the other countries that we like to point the finger at, that being, for the most part, China and Russia, as well as other countries, of course. But that is typically one of the things we use in our international politics as a reason to differentiate ourselves And quite frankly, it's looking like we aren't doing a good job at differentiating ourselves from other countries in the world. So thank you, Mayor. And now I'd like to, I think our dear brother has joined us, Andrew Lewis. Andrew is the Los Angeles Urban League Young Professional Civic Engagement and Political Chair. And we'd like for you to share with us for 10 minutes or so, Andrew, your thoughts and perhaps some observations and suggestions on how to address these things.
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First of all, I apologize about being a little behind. Technology, I'm not the best. I'm still learning every day. But I did want to address today voting and the critical role that our community is going to play in the November elections. You know, I've been talking to a lot of folks, and of course, what is the main election that's on the top of everyone's mind? That would be the White House. But what folks forget is that there are down ballot races that are going to affect us at our local and state level as well. So I wanted to talk about the different races that are going to be happening on the November ballot, as well as propositions. So, you know, as we move into November, I want, of course, people to think about, you know, what's going on in the White House, but we also have to think about district attorney race. We're going to be having city council races as well. And also, I think folks should be aware of the different changes that are happening to our voting system in light of COVID. So folks may or may not know, but everyone in the state will be receiving a mail-in ballot. So I know that people may be concerned about being at polling stations, their safety with that, you know, compromising being in line, going to exercise our right to vote. You know, of course, there's a conflict there, but Governor Newsom has signed an executive order being that every person in the state will receive a mail-in ballot. I just yesterday got this from the county of LA. I don't know if you can see it there, letting me know that our ballot will be on the way, as well as the different voting information that you would need to know leading up to November. So I want folks to look out for that. You know, so it's critical that we make a plan to vote. You know, we have the voting power in this country to shape basically every election, local, state, and national. But the thing is, especially this election cycle, we have to make a plan to vote. So whether that's knowing when your ballot will get to your residence, making sure that you have a plan to drop it off, whether it's at the voting station or mailing it back in. It should be noted as well, you will not need postage to mail this back in. You can just drop it literally back in the mailbox without postage. It'll count, it'll get there. So that's just a few of the changes that are happening. And yeah, I just want folks to recognize that, you know, you don't have to worry about standing in line to vote this election cycle. Mail-in ballot, get it in. And then second is there are quite a few elections that'll be happening on the November ballot. Here in LA County, we actually have smaller municipalities within our county. A lot of people don't know that as well. So we have smaller cities. So Culver City, Santa Monica, West Hollywood. These are actually smaller cities that are in LA County that are going to be having their own elections as well. So when we think about, you know, systemic change and the role that our community can play in it, I definitely want us to think about all the races, all the propositions, everything that's going to be on your ballot. So I'll just pause there.
Thank you. And Andrew, when we introduced this panel, we talked about the results in Ferguson, Missouri, after the unarmed killing of Mike Brown by the police officer and the failure to prosecute the killer. And the result was, when we registered to vote, again, within years, in fact, since 2014, we've as a result of the vote, became the majority on the Ferguson City Council, gotten rid of that prosecutor, and now have the first Black mayor in Ferguson, Missouri. In other words, we took it over as a result of our vote. And I'd like to also ask anyone if they could have input, Tony in particular, what can we tell our viewers and voters how to avoid voter suppression? There's many organizations involved in that. Many of them have lawyers that are going to be at voting booths for those who do have to go out and vote. Then we have those who are securing the mail-in ballots so that they are not misused or misappropriated, if you will. So we want to know, where do people call? Stacey Abrams has a big organization around the country with lawyers. The NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, they're working. But quite frankly, if the vote was held today and I had a problem, I wouldn't know who or where to call. So I think that's a big challenge.
It is. You know, vote.org is a very good resource to go to for voting and for information. You know, when
on election day, on election day,
I'm not sure about in California, but we can get that information and find out. But one of the things that, you know, when we started Equal Justice Now, we thought it was very important to create an atmosphere for educate individuals about the elections and about what's on the ballot and their rights. Because a lot of times in this day and age in 2020, we're not really educated. When they talk about, you know, criminal justice reform, you know, what's the definition of that? What does it mean by criminal justice reform? So it's important that, you know, when they talk about defunding the police, I think we've got to do a better job of defining what defunding the police is so that it's not weaponized against us when we talk about that. When they talk about it in the media, when they talk about, you know, when they want to get rid of certain things in the police, we've got to do a better job of informing people. So that was very, very important for us here at Equal Justice Now.
Yeah. And in furtherance of that discussion about voter suppression, and to use a perfect example, in Georgia, when Stacey Abrams ran for governor, 200,000 people statewide were removed from the registration list, the majority of which were African-American people. And that was by a Republican Secretary of State who colluded, we would believe, with the governor, whom Stacey was running against. So once again, that voter suppression is really going to be a challenge. They're going to be moving voting booths for those states that are voting at the booth, and that will be many, particularly the southern states, which are controlled by Republicans and are specializing or have developed a specialty in voter suppression. They'll move the ballot boxes around, and people will go to their usual location that they vote, and it won't be there anymore. And it'll be an hour away, and it'll be 7 o'clock, and the voting booth will close at 8. So by the time they drive across town, their vote has been, their opportunity to vote has been eliminated. So I can't stress that enough, that's one of the strategies we really have to be on top of and know who to turn to when that happens to us. Input on voter suppression, your observations, insights, advice to those who might be viewing. Mira, you know everything. Come on, girl.
I would just implore people, it's funny because me and Trell have had this conversation on sidebars. I would implore people to use as many resources and guides that are out there as possible. I have a political science degree, and voting is still overwhelming to me. And I want everybody out there to know that that's not by accident, it's on purpose, just as voter suppression is on purpose. But the glory and the gift of the internet and the World Wide Web is the fact that the information is there if you just take the time to educate yourselves. I personally take a lot of time on my social networks to share as many resources as I find. There are a lot of voter guides that are available. not as many as there should be. I think there should be a lot more people being like, hey, especially when it comes to propositions like Andrew was mentioning, if you vote yes on this, it means this. For instance, we just saw in the last midterm elections with Proposition 10 and rent control in this country, this state, particular in California, we have an incredible homelessness population that is growing by the day, that we're seeing is growing right now in this pandemic as people are starting to invoke evictions, even though there was a stay on them. And just out of sheer misinformation and $56 million in counteractive campaigning, and I don't know if anybody saw huge mailers that come to your house that are like this big and a waste of piece of paper with misinformation, misrepresenting what the propositions actually mean. They encourage people to vote the other way to their own detriment. And so I really think in terms of reading comprehension and just sussing information, it's imperative that all of us take the time to really understand what's going on and not feed into the rhetoric that is thrown at us, the fear mongering that is thrown at us. There's a lot that is shifting on a day-to-day basis in terms of our civil rights as citizens in this country, with that man in office who I refuse to acknowledge as my president, because people simply are not all the way in tune with the information that is available to them. So I think it is important to be paying attention to your ballot when it arrives, to be seeking out sources that you trust, and what people, what propositions, what laws, what legislation they are supporting, and understanding why, and making those decisions for yourself. I personally never get in the business of telling people what to believe or what to vote, but I do think that gaining as much information as possible so that you're making informed choices is incredibly important at this time.
Let me now allow Trell to weigh in on either this subject matter or the things we've discussed thus far.
Yeah, I thank you. I want to just kind of harp on a little bit of what Mira said. Yes, we know that voting can be overwhelming, but there are ways to simplify it. And I would tell people, start with where you are with what you have, right? We all know 5 people who may or may not be registered to vote. Text those people. Call those people, send them the website, vote.org. It's so simple. And say, hey, it takes less than 10 minutes to get registered to vote. Word of mouth is the most powerful way to spread anything. We know it from our parties. We know it from our events. We know it from even this panel that we're talking on, right? So just start with your network where you are. And I would task everybody and challenge everybody, just text 5 people today to get them registered to vote. And even more specifically, have everyone find out how they can absentee vote, because the fact is, it varies state by state, like I mentioned earlier, but sometimes, some of those things close, the registration for those things close a little bit earlier. So we want to just make sure that everybody has every way to be able to vote before the time comes. So start now, start with your network, with what you have. And that's what I'll say.
Tai, let me ask your colleagues, both in the business and the friends that might come from people of color, and what type of discussions are they having regarding voting aside from who to vote for? Do they express any concern? Is that something that they would be prepared to even consider it during their process of voting, the voting suppression? Does that come up?
I'll say this, with everything going on right now, and especially with the corona, people don't know if they're going to be able to feed themselves. So, first nature is feed my family. Second nature is voting, right? So as we're speaking about this voting stuff, we have to talk about the situations that we're in currently right now. I was listening to what Mira was saying and Trell was saying, and then I was doing some research online, and something I just came up with that I just read, and it's interesting. It says amongst 18 to 29 years old, the voting turnout went from 20% in 2014 to 36% in 2018. That's the largest jump increase of age. So, I would say this: education, to our kids, you know, our brothers and sisters that are younger. You know, these kids are the ones that are making a difference. I was at this store yesterday, and I saw one of these cars, and this car said, you know, BLM side, we have a voice, we will be heard. And they made these signs, you know, on their car, and they wanted everybody to, you know, to watch and see what their message was. So I waited there because I wanted to see who was going to put that on their new car. And believe it or not, it was probably somebody in there, they're 18 or 19 years old. You know, their message is important. And if we're not going to listen to the Gen Z, the Gen X, you know, I think that I think we're going to be mistaken in who's going to be the dark horse. And I think it's our younger generation are the ones that are really going to step up, because their voices matter, their voices count, and they're not looking at color. They're looking at what's right.
Tai, that's a great observation. Let me say that our brother who has not been charged or convicted of a crime, I'll proceed with that first, Russell Simmons, really changed the face of America, and the contributed significantly to the movement we're seeing now. The majority of the protesters were white millennials across the country, joining with African Americans who are fighting against injustice that, for the most part, we're the only ones that are victims of, and people of color as well, brown people. And the fact is, it's because they gained a mutual point of view, because they were tied together by hip hop. The majority of all hip hop music, or 80% in fact, are purchased by white youth. Some of it is a dynamic of income, but others is a dynamic of interest. Eminem is regarded, well, he is the highest selling, at least he was some years ago, the highest selling rap artist of all time. Sold more records than anybody. And that's off 2 albums, I believe it was. Why? Because white youth looked to hip hop. They enjoyed it. Color, and they found it, color to be less important than anything else. Berry Gordy, for the previous generation, I give him credit with the Motown sound, with bringing the black and the white liberals of that day, or protesters of that day, together. And so you make a good point, Tai, that we've come together across racial lines to try and seek justice and equality. And I think that we have a unique opportunity, but we must follow up on that and transition, not just from protests against police brutality and unarmed killings, but we must transition with our white brothers and brown brothers into an area of equal justice at the voting ballot. And I'll allow anyone who wants to talk now to weigh in. Who's next? Lewis,
I think we have to remind people also of our history, that people died for us to have the right to vote. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King, he died for us to have that right. You know, John Lewis, he died trying to change in real time now in 2020. So we have to teach our young people that, you know, there was people that died, and I'm probably gonna date myself, but you know, when I was a kid, I worked on McGovern's campaign. You know, I had a strong black mother, single mom, who thought it was important for us to know about, you know, voting, to know about our rights. And I've worked on many campaigns ever since then. But you know, not everyone does that, but we have to educate and tell them what our history is.
Brother Lewis, let me hear from you. You came in late. We said a lot before you came in, and so you have some catching up to do.
I do indeed. And I want to follow up on the last point. John Lewis was mentioned. John Lewis, and I didn't realize, I just recently watched his documentary. I advise everyone to go check it out. Got arrested dozens and dozens and dozens and beaten multiple times so that we could vote. You know, he considered voting the most sacred tool of our democracy, and I agree. And it was mentioned before, we have to remind the younger folks that this hasn't always been a privilege for us. Folks have put in a lot of work. There's been a lot of history. And as you mentioned, Judge Mathis, even today, voting is still under attack in this country. Stacey Abrams should be the governor of Georgia. Andrew Gillum should be the governor, or no, she should be the governor of Georgia. Andrew Gillum should be the governor of Florida. They are not, largely because of voter suppression. We talk about defunding the police, changes in that regard. That happens at the local level. Cities are beginning to defund and scale back their police departments, largely thanks to their city councils. And who you're electing to those city councils are making those decisions. So we have to think about the changes that we want in our community. You know, here in LA, we talk about defunding LAPD, reforming the police department in our LA Unified School Districts. That's the school board and the city council. If we want to see those changes, we got to think about who are the people that we're electing into these local seats. And so, you know, I want everyone today, at some point today, to go and look up their local county recorder's office and see when their ballots are going to get mailed. It's real quick. Do it online. I called my grandma this morning. Call your county recorder office. Go online to their website. See when your ballot's going to get mailed. As you mentioned, check out your local polling place. There are places that are still purging the voting rolls. That means you're being taken off the roll, and unless you add yourself back, your right to vote is being challenged, and a lot of people don't know that. So I want everyone today to be proactive about that and get ahead of this, so that when it gets to election day, as what happened with Sister Stacey Abrams, we don't have 50,000 people that are ineligible to vote because of this. We got to get ahead of this, and this is something that she is so passionate about with her voting project. And lastly, I'll just end on, I saw Barack Obama gave a statement a couple weeks ago speaking on the energy around George Floyd, and he mentioned that this energy is great, but for the change to take place that we want, we have to match it at the voting booth. So I'll just leave it at that, and I couldn't agree more with what he said.
Let me follow up also on Tai and Mir's remarks. Mir regarding the correction system, the prison industrial complex, and Tai regarding the movement by the hip hop or the millennial generation to cross racial lines as it relates to protests. I would suggest we have a unique opportunity, and I'm going to use the word radicalize. We have a unique opportunity to radicalize the cross-racial generation of protesters and those who either have been to prison or are on the verge of being released from prison. You know, I say it's a unique opportunity because that is what's on the mind of our millennials right now. They are woke, even those who have been involved in the criminal justice system. And by the way, the majority, overwhelming majority of the states, in fact, I think it's only 9 states left that prohibit or that interfere with the right to vote for ex-felons. Those who are currently in prison, of course, can't vote. But those on the outside, and that's a misunderstanding, those on the outside can vote everywhere other than, I believe, 9, it used to be 11 states. So we need to make that clear, and most people aren't. And so when I say radicalize, of course, I'm not talking about looting or shooting. And because in this case, they talk about all the looting. Quite frankly, the shooting of innocent Black men came before the looting. Shooting came before the looting. So the fact is, when I was incarcerated as a 18-year-old, first time in real jail, I was radicalized by Jesse Jackson. If you want to call it that. I had grown up in the projects and had seen the Black Panthers in the projects, had a heavy presence, so did the Nation of Islam. So I knew about people fighting for justice, but I was a criminal, and that's what I wanted to be. And that's what I enjoyed being. And because I didn't pay much attention to what was going on around me. Well, when I was locked up and didn't have much attention to pay to, I didn't have many things to pay attention to other than what was going on in my environment. Reverend Jackson came and spoke to us on one of his I Am Somebody crusades. And as a curious young kid, having reflected back on the Black Panther movement, and he had tied everything together and woke me up, me and several other prisoners who were there. And I asked him if I could join that movement. I want to join that movement to fight white people. And that was my expression. And of course, he told me, well, you don't have the ammunition. He said, go to school and get you a degree, then you can come back and work with me. 4 years later, I had my GED, my degree, came back in '83, worked on his campaign in '84. 8 years later, was one of the top assistants to Mayor Young in Detroit. And then 3 years after that, the youngest judge in Michigan history, after leaving jail 15 years earlier. I was radicalized. I was radicalized with one speech. And the images I saw in my neighborhood, the images of the Black Panthers, the images of the Nation of Islam and others. We didn't have civil rights in the hood. We looked more at the radical approach to change. And so I think this is a unique opportunity for those incarcerated, for those recently released from the criminal justice system, so that we can bust them upside the head. I think this is a good opportunity to crack their heads with the knowledge of self-empowerment and community empowerment. And I'll let you all comment on that. Mir, what do you think of that observation that we should really work on these ex-offenders and recently released to really motivate them?
No, absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to education and information sharing. One of the things, to your point earlier about hip hop and rappers, that I've noticed, particularly in my arena of work, is rappers like Offset very publicly going to register to vote, showing individuals like him that come from places like him that it's possible for them too. To your point about the states where you can or cannot gain that privilege back. I think a big part of systemic racism and a big part of oppression is the fact that we are taught to hold information to ourselves as if sharing that information would be a detriment to our own success. And it's actually quite the opposite. I find it, particularly in my own journey, in my own life, the more that I share the information, the more that I teach, the more that I share how I've been radicalized or inspired to do the work, the more others are able to empower themselves in that same way. And we've seen particularly a lot of people using their platforms as of late to share what they didn't know and how that was not, some kind of shortcoming or some kind of, flaw that they possessed. We oftentimes don't know what we don't know. And the more that we are putting ourselves in vulnerable positions, because vulnerability is our superpower, to be like, hey, I didn't know this, here's how I learned, and here's a resource where in which you can learn too. I think this is an unprecedented time where we can indoctrinate intergenerational respect. It shouldn't be until our great leaders like Congressman Lewis pass away that we are educating ourselves. We should be aware of these people. We should be supporting their work in the here and now and giving them their roses in the here and now. We saw that with Nipsey Hussle, how much he tried and strived to share the information he was learning in real time. And we continue that work. I'm often, disheartened when people want to focus on, we need a leader and where are the leaders? We have a ton of people leading right now, a ton of people to pay attention to, and we can each be leaders in our own right, in our own community, in our own households, sharing the information that we know, and that we're learning in real time, because we are literally spearheading towards this. And I did want to make one note in terms of millennials and Gen Zers. I consider myself an elder millennial. I'm on the older end of that age gap or whatnot. But one thing that is really key to know is that in this coming election, we'll outnumber the baby boomers and all of those people that we're looking to of the old system or the way that things were. And that doesn't mean that it's an us versus them. That means it's a perfect time to pick up the baton and take on the work and continue to do it and educate ourselves in that manner. to the point that Andrew was saying in terms of, you know, voter guides. I don't want to assume that everybody tuning in is from California, but vote411.org is a great resource for Gen Zers and millennials. Rock the Vote is still a very prevalent resource, rockthevote.org. There's tons of information on how to get absentee ballots, on how to vote through this pandemic, on how to inform yourself by your state, by your region, by your local county, and really be paying attention to what's going on and tapping in. And I think that that's such a superpower to gain that for yourself and be able to share it with your friends and your family, for sure.
Let me observe or make an observation regarding the hip hop generation as well, and the leaders there within. That being right now, we have Killer Mike, one of the leaders of the hip hop generation in the political aspirations and analysis and motivation. Then we have T.I. Same thing. He has an outstanding podcast that addresses social justice issues. And those are the people that our young folks listen to. They're even motivated by the recent beef between T.I. and 50 Cent. Well, they're even putting that into a political context, because it's really boils down to an issue of the justice system. That is, 50 Cent is criticizing T.I. for having done an anti-crime commercial years ago and calling him a snitch, which we know is a big problem within our community, where they've misconstrued this snitch philosophy. I know what it is. I was in the street. That is a code of the streets. Innocent people have never been harmed by telling the police what is going on in their community. And they weren't regarded as snitches. They were regarded as people who were concerned about the safety of their community. Now they've twisted that up into even where square folks, or if you will, regular civilians, are being called snitches and suffering ramification, when in the past that was only between criminals. What, criminals, y'all snitch on each other? Very well, go out into the field and do what you do. Just don't hit no innocent people. I shouldn't advocate that either. But the fact is, those are the leaders of our generation, because they have the followers. I like to say that leaders, and then I'm going to pass it on, leaders have to have followers. If you don't have any followers and you call yourself a leader, you're just taking a walk. Gentlemen, ladies, let's hear some more. Now, you all see I can talk. I'm a lawyer. That's what I do for a living. My wife says I filibuster. So I'm going to stop filibustering y'all and let you talk. All right, we're going to get then to some questions of each other. Perhaps because I know that from what I've heard, we can give a lot of insight to each other, because some of us have specialties in different areas. So why don't we ask some questions of each other? I'll start with Tony. Tony, the work that Equal Justice Now is doing would focus on which area of importance, or perhaps in the order of importance?
Criminal justice reform is at the top of our list. You know, when we started it, there were people would talk about around the country that they wanted to change the system, but they never really defined what they were talking about. They never really said, you know, what about the system? They said, well, you know, we want to, you know, get rid of bail. We want to get rid of certain things. And so we felt it was important that we begin to educate people on if you get rid of bail, what happens after that? If you want to change the system, you need to change the system, and it starts with over-policing, because a lot of times people don't understand that over-policing is a fundamental problem in our communities, because they'll over-police in one community and they won't in the other. It's just not right. It's not fair. So we feel that it's very, very important that we get the message out about the criminal justice system. It's important that when you're voting, you look at the down ballots on your district attorney, you know, looking at what their philosophy is on policing, you know, because they really determine who's gonna go to jail, who's gonna get arrested. And in some states, you know, the officers, they will contact the district attorney on call and ask them about this crime and on what are we going to arrest this person for, or we're going to arrest this person for X, Y, or Z. That's so and so important.
You know, Tai, I'd like for you to give an observation or your theories on why in the upscale communities we don't see, even in the suburban communities where many African Americans upper income live. Certainly they're discriminated against as well. They're quicker to get a ticket when they're stopped for running the red light. And on the other hand, some are quick to receive Caucasians a warning. But on the other hand, with regard to police brutality, that appears to be economic based, meaning that the officers patrolling poor minority communities are more anxious, if you will, to get involved in police misconduct and brutality. From your observation in real estate, what do you see in that area? What can you share with us?
Well, let me go back to what you were talking about, again, about getting pulled over. I think we have a common friend, Marilyn Booker.
Yes.
Okay. So I've been friends with her for a long period of time, and her kids are friends. You know, I feel like I'm like their second dad in a sense.
Okay.
I love her children. Really amazing. You know, they went to Harvard, and you had to do an internship. I got them one of the kids a job at Rolls-Royce, so he could have an experience. But you know, as you know about Marilyn's story, how she got, I guess, fired from her job, and you know, she said that her budgets were cut 71%, and her job was to go out and do urban outreach, you know, in education. She told me a story about her son. When her son got her driver's license, he was 16 years old, obviously driving his car, and you know, maybe a little quick, but he got pulled over, you know, I think a couple times in a month. And the son went to her and said, hey, you know, I was driving normal, didn't go past the speed limit. And, you know, the cop gave me a hard time, Mom. And he broke down to his mom. And, you know, when she told me that story, you know, I called him and asked him about it. Because, you know, being a certain race, we don't always see that. And I'm not fully white, by the way, guys. I'm half Asian, 50%. My dad's from Thailand. I'm a first gen in this country. My mom's white. Right? So, you know, I see two different cultures. My dad was a, you know, different culture, totally different way of life. My mom's a different culture. So, you know, being from a different culture, you don't always understand and see other people's, you know, through their eyes. And, you know, knowing this kid of Marilyn's, you know, one of the nicest kids, you know, just never really spoke up, but understanding who he is and knowing where his heart's at, you know, he was stereotyped. And understanding, because I actually honestly didn't really know, you know, I wasn't really paying attention because it doesn't happen to you. If it doesn't happen to you, you're not going to know about it because you're not going to ask questions. And to be honest with you, that's really my fault for not understanding and not doing some research, you know. And now that I'm educating myself, I agree, there is a ton of things that need to change. And it starts with myself, starts with, you know, a family member and educating them. So the first thing is we have to take accountability. And the way we're going to change this is to educate our family members first, okay? Because it starts from home, you know? And I think we have a lot of hate going on, and we need to give more love out there, and we need to give more support and understanding. We have to have more understanding where people are coming from and understanding, you know, what is their fight and can we align ourselves? Because they have a certain passion. And if we love our friends, we're going to fight with them. And I think it's no different.
Mm-hmm. You know, Tai, I think you said one of the most profound things we've heard this afternoon, and perhaps in the area of race, and that is that we should educate our own communities. I'm reminded of perhaps one of the most crucial moments in the movie Malcolm X, or enlightening moments. When Malcolm was speaking, I believe, at an Ivy League school, and a white girl walked up to him and she said, Mr. X, what can we do, or what can I do to help this movement? And he very bluntly and directly said, nothing. She looked shocked and startled. Nothing to help our movement. what you can do is go back and educate your community. It's your community that's sick, and your community needs the healing. So if you love your community and you love your family, help heal your family from the sickness of racism. So thanks, Tai, for that insight. And quite frankly, we need to hear more folks who are not Black and brown saying the same thing. Thank you very much. And let's get to economic empowerment. One of the things we haven't discussed. So now that we've really weighed in on voting rights and equal justice, how about economic empowerment? Because it's my belief that, as we just disclosed, there's less, not none, but there's less police oppression in upper class or upper income neighborhoods than there are in impoverished communities. And so that begs to say that if you are not impoverished, you suffer less police misconduct and less police equal justice victimization, for lack of a better phrase. And so what can we do to empower ourselves economically so that we can move out of crime and drug infested communities and then come back and help develop them once we have achieved our success? Because in many ways, poverty solves a lot of things. The best anti-crime program is a job with livable wages. So why don't you guys weigh in on economic empowerment? I'm gonna go ahead, Mir.
Oh, I was just going to jump in. I think that, again, like, these things keep coming back to voting. You know, we need to be raising the minimum wage to a livable wage. We need to be educating one another on the resources right now that are happening within the pandemic. It's interesting that we're having all of these things uncovered in such an unprecedented time where, despite your background, we were all kind of leveled in staying in our homes and being forced and confronted with all of these issues that are plaguing our society. And to Tai's point, imploring people to educate themselves, to make themselves more aware, because we were no longer able to kind of just carry on within our siloed experiences anymore. We were kind of placed in for the time being, the same kind of playing field. And I think when it comes to economic empowerment, particularly now that the way that, to the points brought up about hip hop, there has been over the years this very focused drive on the 1% within our society, and capitalism working in exactly the way that it was intended to. And because of the socioeconomic standpoints, we've kind of seen more of a relatable experience, as has historically been the Black or brown experience within this country. Within that, we are finding a generation that is forced to have multiple streams of income. And how can we do that? How can we spread those resources? How can we teach ways to set those up? How can we teach people how to have online businesses in a time like now, as our normal is completely shifting? And how can we get, you know, again, to Tai's point about buying homes and first-time homeowners, there's so many resources out there that I feel like the information just does not get to people in an adequate way or channels, as well as those who have the information are kind of keeping it precious, right? So how do we level the access points as well as the abundance of education so that people can level the playing field economically? A lot of my friends during this time have been educating themselves on stocks and trading within the United States economy, and ways to really boost themselves in that way while we're stuck at home, while we're not able to work in the conventional ways that we are. Again, the internet is a gift and a curse, but it's also a tool that we can utilize to market ourselves to, you know, now that schooling is changing, are you know, an expert in a particular field? Could you offer workshops? We have to get more creative and vast within the ways that we apply our skill sets to be making more money at this time.
Anyone else? Before I filibuster, go ahead, Tai.
I would love to hop in there. So Mira, to your point, you know, about the education and how can we create new jobs and create more money. In the housing sector, most cities have certain funds as down payment assistance. So, you know, the FHA, VA, you know, VA, it doesn't require a down payment. A lot of people don't realize that. It's not FICO driven. There's some banks that have overlays. FHA, you can get a house with 3.5% down. You can get the money gifted. You could have 5 co-borrowers. It's understanding and how to manipulate something that's legal, you know, but understanding how to put a deal together. A lot of people don't understand how that works. Everybody could be a homeowner if they have an idea of what they want to buy, what they can afford. But going to what I was talking about, the down payment, there's programs in LA, the HEART program, which they'll give you the down payment. So essentially, all you're coming down with is your closing cost. And a lot of people don't realize that because it's not out there. If everybody applied, there would not be money left over. At least that's what we think. We don't really know their budgets, but I would say, you know, to find their cities and ask what their down payment assistance is. You know, there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of grant money out there, but people are not taking the opportunities to follow their dreams of having home ownership. I have a client that is African-American. She's been renting for years and years and years. She sold her first investment property with me. She made a lot of money, and she's going to empower other friends of hers to do the same. So it's really about education. It's really about how much money are you making versus how much money you're putting away for rent. A lot of people don't know how that works. If they have a CPA or an accountant, check with them, learn about and educate themselves about FICO scores. I mean, there's Credit Karma, there's, you know, Credit Sesame, where you can find your FICO scores for free. Understand about credit. This country's built off credit. You know, why is it important? It's the foundation of buying anything in this country. But, and I don't know what the buying power for African American is exactly. I was actually trying to do some research a couple days ago, but it wasn't high. And how can we change that? You know, there's numerous ways, you know, but it starts with them and other cultures about educating themselves on what they can afford and are they saving money and being credit responsible. So.
Yeah, Tai, my analysis and the analysis of others, and it is a fact as a matter, that is the home ownership is the #1 asset for any family, for any individual. And the reason, much of the reason that white wealth is 10 times that of Black wealth is because of that. FHA was created to boost home ownership amongst minorities. But the problem has been the income being able to match the mortgage. And that's where financial or the discrimination in the workplace and the rejection of Black people in the workplace and moving them up. 1% of Silicon Valley are Black and brown people. 2% or 3% it is, our great liberal Los Angeles entertainment industry has 3% Black employment. And so it is that it is also the economic deprivation that we suffer from, that we can't pay a mortgage, which is the #1 way toward wealth in our families because unemployment and poverty. And so, yes, I think that economic justice requires empowerment through land. That's the essence of it. Land has always been the primary source of wealth in this country. And now land, as in housing, it still remains the same. So I think empowering our people in the area of real estate and economic empowerment in many ways is dependent on economic equity from corporate America, and particularly those who love us so dearly. I mean, we're the hottest thing in the world right now. Everybody loves Black people. We are everything to everybody. Everybody's throwing money at us. Well, I'm on the national board of the NAACP. I had a conversation with the leadership as they were contemplating how much money to ask for from the entertainment industry. And I was very, and I still am very disheartened that I don't know how much was asked for, but the agreement came down to a commitment from CBS for $7 million, a paltry amount. I believe I have a deal about worth that. I have a production deal with Warner Brothers. I believe I get that much for pilots, because that's the essence of what it is. And the employees are going to be the traditional CBS employee who is moved over to run the NAACP initiative, and the salary that they take from CBS goes now, you get that salary from this NAACP commitment you've made. So in my opinion, it's like three-car model. And that's one of the things that we must learn. Economic literacy, financial literacy is perhaps one of the other biggest challenges that Tai made reference to. We have churches around the country who do administer financial literacy to their congregation, but they don't attend. Folks don't attend. I've suggested recently that those receiving loans backed by SBA and otherwise, that they be required, and loans from banks, an individual bank should require a financial literacy instructional before loaning them money. And if it's a business, entrepreneurship training before loaning the money. That's not necessarily something that creates a barrier or causes less empowerment. It's something that causes more successful economic empowerment. And with that, I'm done filibustering. Let's get some more economic empowerment observations or discussion.
You know, I'll say this, and it sounds like Tai is doing it already, and I would like to put a challenge out to everyone who's listening here today, that it's important to mentor somebody, to educate them, you know, take them under your wings, you know, teach them how to buy a house. Because it's one thing to have the information out there. It's another thing to take somebody under your wings, to teach them, to nudge them. Sometimes you have to nudge people in that direction. Sometimes you have to push them a little harder. You know, I'll never forget. I'll tell you this quick story. This was years ago, and there was this guy, white guy, and he, I was at his office. I was doing a real estate transaction, and I just happened to tell him I was thinking about starting a business. And he says, well, I don't know anybody in that. He says, wait a second, there's a black guy across the street from me that might be able to help you. He says, there's another guy I know over at Warner Brothers that might be. So he says, you know what? I'm gonna have a dinner party for you at my house. And within 2 weeks, he had a dinner party at his house. And it was 7, 8 people there. He had it catered, very wealthy guy. And so at the end of the dinner, he made everybody give me their numbers. And so they did. And so the one guy there that he thought I was going to relate to, the black guy, never called me back. Not one time. And I'm not mad at him, but he just never called me back. But there was a gentleman, Caucasian white guy there that did, and he took me under his wings. And I credit a lot of my success to him because he showed me the way. He showed me a lot of the ropes. And he and I are still friends to this day. So I think it's important that we go out of our ways to help somebody else and to mentor somebody. And that's how that person will be able to understand how to gain wealth as well.
Tony, perhaps the black person didn't call you back because he couldn't help you.
No, he could have.
Okay.
He could have.
So you think.
I'm not gonna put him out there. I'm not gonna put him out there. He could have. I ain't gonna mention his name. You know, but he
helped you at the expense of helping someone else who was more important to him.
That's true. But he could have. He could have.
And I just want to jump in real quick, if I could. You know, we talk about economic empowerment, and we've had a good discussion on housing. And I just want to say that the wealth gap in this country, where white families have about 10 to 12 times the wealth of Black and brown, is by design. This is no accident. And it's been alluded to before that this is directly tied to land and home ownership. And that if we're going to close this gap, we really have to focus on, and it's easier said than done as a community, but home ownership and owning. And, you know, I really want to plug as well that, and Mir kind of hit on this as well, you know, capitalism as a whole, but we've got to look at as well credit unions and investing in our communities and keeping those dollars that we have and that we make in our communities. We haven't yet touched on gentrification, but in my community in LA and across the country, in Oakland, elsewhere, we look at places where we have our dollars, our ownership, and we see that turning over a lot of the time because we don't keep the money that we have and that we make invested in our businesses, in our land, in our schools, in our candidates. It's critical. It's critical that we have to keep that there. I look at what's happening in Inglewood, in South Central by USC, where we're losing our communities so quickly to outside dollars and outside investments. And it's happening like that. It's happening in the blink of an eye. Inglewood is not going to be what it was. Compton, other places that were historically African-American, that are just changing literally by the week because we're losing so much of the investment that we used to have and ownership in that community. And it is all tied together with regards to voting, with regards to owning the houses and the land, and then you know, securing and investing in the businesses. So I just wanted to add that real quick.
Let me also, go ahead, Mir.
No, I was just going to point out, Judge, that we do have a few questions from the audience. I wasn't
good. Great. Can we go, Tony? You're the boss, Tony. Can we go to the audience for questions?
Absolutely. Let's do it. We have a bunch of questions here. All
right. And who's going to access those questions?
I can't. Amir, do you see any of the questions?
I have them up. Yeah. So
why don't you take one?
Okay, Pomp US asks, what are some of the initiatives this November that the panel thinks we should focus on? Andrew, I know you had mentioned a few.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still learning this Zoom thing every day. A couple we should focus on, I'm gonna speak on California ballot measures. There's a ballot measure, and this affected me personally, to repeal Prop 209. Prop 209 made affirmative action in California illegal in our public institutions. When you look at you know, our public universities in California, I went to UCLA. We have a bunch of Cal State universities. We have a bunch of UC universities. The enrollment numbers for Black and brown enrollment has plummeted as a result of getting rid of affirmative action. We have a chance this November to reinstate that. When I came into UCLA, the African-American class was less than 1%. And half of those students were recruited athletes. So the students that got into my class at UCLA, just on academic performance without affirmative action was like 0.3%, the lowest it's ever been. It's a civil rights issue. So we have a chance to change that this November on the ballot measure. I saw it in the chat as well. There's a ballot measure that will allow folks on parole to vote in California. Currently, they cannot do that. That is a civil rights atrocity. And it will allow, I think it's around 50, 60,000 folks who are on parole, the right to vote. And that's an enfranchisement issue. That's a civil rights issue. In 2020, that should not be happening, especially in California. I would also encourage you to look into schools and community first ballot measure. It's a large one. It will allow, it will tax, and Mira, you mentioned this as well, corporations to invest in local school funding. If you look at Pacific Palisades School District and you compare it to Compton Unified School District, the per pupil spending is drastic. Why is that? It's because school district funding is tied to property taxes. If the local property taxes for the homes in the neighborhood are $4 million homes, the taxes from that are going to vastly outweigh if the most of the neighborhood is comprised of low-income tenants. If we can tax the some of the larger corporations in the area and close that loophole, we can start to increase funding. There are 21 propositions. Please go online in California, check them out. But these are issues and ballot measures that will drastically change our quality of life, but also our civil rights issues currently in California. So I'll leave it at that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that before we go to the next question? What are the important things on the ballot people should be mindful of? All right, next question, Mir. It's your turn, Mir. And
Mel Jenkins asks, how can we take control of what voting initiatives reach the ballot?
who's going to take that? That's a tough one. Mir, you can take it. Go ahead, Tony. Yes, sir.
No, I was going to say Andrew might want to weigh in on that. It looked like he was trying to weigh in on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, getting the ballot, getting a proposition on the ballot is tough. It requires a lot of signatures, a lot of money. My friend, y'all may know her, Patrice Cullors. She's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. We went to school together here at UCLA. It took her 4 years to put a proposition on the ballot to reform the LA jails. It was called Reform LA, so that we can get an oversight committee to look into the atrocities and start to hold the sheriff's department accountable. All that to say, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, but I wouldn't say don't write it off. But what you will need is coalition power. You're going to have to work with bring decisions, raise some money, and get a lot of signatures to get it placed on the ballot.
Once again, folks, he mentioned Patrice as a co-founder. All co-founders of Black Lives Matter were Black women. I'll sit back from there.
Also, you can tap into each of their individual initiatives that have sprung out of Black Lives Matter. As I mentioned earlier, Patrice runs Movement for Black Lives, which is a very informative and active powerhouse in terms of defunding the police. They clearly lay out their entire policy stances on their website. You can just look up Movement for Black Lives and find them. Also, Alicia Garza, another co-founder of Black Lives Matter, has started the Black Futures Lab, which is responsible for the Black census work. They actually got a team of folks to go out to the more rural and left out areas of our demographic to make sure we are counted fully in this year's census, so that it does affect a lot of these allocations of funds and resources by county, by state. I know we're pretty California heavy on this panel, but there again are several guides. Pod Save America, which is a great resource, has votesaveamerica.com, where you can actually go by state, by city, and see the prevalent legislation that is on the ballot for where you live and where you're tuning in from.
Trell, talk to us.
And I knew you were going to get ready to call on me. Mir and Andrew pretty much said everything that there was to say about how to get a ballot on. What I will say is there was a question, because I can see the questions too. Someone asked, can someone express emphasis on the deadline to register to vote for everyone? And I'll say that differs based on what state you're in. So you have to do your research, and it's never too early to do that. So I would say start right now. Back to what I spoke about earlier, and just pick a number of people. 5 seems like a reasonable number, and make sure that they're registered as well. Once you've got it's like when you're on the airplane, right? And they say secure your mask and then put the mask on other people. Make sure you're registered and you have the information, and then share the information with other people. That is the best way, because yes, it varies state by state.
And in California, do we know some states have same-day registration? Where I'm from in Michigan, I vote in Detroit. We have 30-day prior to the election deadline. Do anyone know what California is? Registration deadline or same-day registration, or
You
anyone
can.
know?
You
By
can.
mail, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead. You go ahead. All you.
In person is 15 days before election day, but obviously because of the pandemic, that might not be the case. By mail, it has to be postmarked 15 days before election day. And online, where applicable, it has to be 15 days before election day. I put the link to the vote.org deadlines by state, but most of them range from election day to 30 days out.
In California, you can vote provisionally as well, which means you can go in person, register, as was mentioned, on the spot. Your vote will count. So if you're in California, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're registered to vote, show up, and you can still vote provisionally. Your vote will count. And as was just mentioned, I just got this yesterday. Must be, if you return by mail, must be postmarked by election day. There it is. But
And
otherwise, provisionally on the spot, go, it will count. And this is a misnomer that folks think it won't count. It will count. We count the provisionals. It's the second wave of counting. As you know, when they count ballots, there's waves. The final vote tally always includes the provisionals last, but they count towards the total.
And the reason for provisional ballots is why? Is it because of a small technicality won't allow you to vote that day, but they have to confirm that you are a resident and eligible for voting? Is that what the provisional ballot serves? I think that is the case. Andrew?
Yeah, so provisional ballot, there's an assortment of reasons why people will vote provisionally. A lot of the time it's because where your information in the county recorder's office may not match like your mailing address or your ballot. So if you moved, then they'll request that you vote provisionally. If you've changed your name in any capacity, they'll request that you vote provisionally. Basically, if there's any difference between what the county recorder has on their books as opposed to what may be on your most updated driver's license, they may request that you vote provisionally. At the end of the day, again, it all counts. All the ballots are sent back to Norwalk. That's where the LA County Recorder's office is. They literally go through them all. They count them all, and so
Let me ask, you said qualify or register or request to vote provisionally. I know you have to request an absentee ballot to get it. What does the request mean? Is that at the voting booth, or is that also a deadline that you have to request and receive a provisional ballot? My understanding of a provisional ballot is you just go there, they say, we don't know if you're eligible, but go ahead and vote and we'll check it out later. But it sounds like you might be saying you have to request one prior to going to the voting booth. So I think we really need some clarification on this from those who might know best, and that would be Andrew and those who have studied electoral process here in California, because that's unclear to me.
Yeah, no, Judge, you got that correct. You would request your provisional ballot at the voting booth. So I ran our voting center at the last cycle here at UCLA. I ran that myself, and probably 30% of the folks there voted provisionally on the spot. All it is, it's literally one extra form that goes with your ballot, and you fill in your most updated information there on the spot. And we have like a separate provisional ballot box that goes into, but that's done on the day there. provisional ballot, you can do it in person when you're there and fill out any new information that may need to be changed.
All right. Mayor, next question.
Okay. From Lanisha West, she asked, how should departments respond to officers' abuse of drugs or alcohol?
How should they respond when they recognize that that person is either drunk or high, that that officer is either drunk or high at that moment, or they know of that officer getting drunk and high? How do you interpret that question? Because all of them get high when they get home. I'm just kidding. Some of them drink excessively to cover up the stress that they have to deal with. And they might even smoke a joint, but we don't want them doing that on the job. So what is the question, at home or on the job or both?
Well, since she didn't specify, I think we can address both. And I think to Andrew's point of Patrice getting the oversight committees in place, this is a part of the plan to divest from the police funds or reallocate those funds in more beneficial ways to really allow our police departments to protect and serve everyone. As I'm sure, you know, a lot of people have seen with the recent marches and protests and rhetoric that ensues with that, you know, most states require more training for a hairstylist than for a police officer with a high school education. And these, you know, we're giving these people weapons, we're giving them equipment to hurt people, we're giving them free range to police and monitor environments that they are not properly trained in. And to that point in that question, they are still human beings who are susceptible to the same vices as the rest of us. And the more that we indoctrinate those facts into how we monitor and train our policing systems, I think we will be on a better course. And so those are involved definitely in those conversations of defunding the police and reallocating funds for sure.
And do we know whether there's a lot of rehabilitation opportunity within the police departments? Because that you list a very important part once again, and that is redirecting funding to areas that are better needed for patrolling. And that would mean if you have a drug or alcohol addiction, whether it started at home or on the job, you need rehabilitation, because if you're addicted, you're still gonna get high on the job. So do we know whether there's significant rehabilitation in police departments around the country offered to their officers or required? Because if you have a complaint, you should really have to go through an analysis and then be required if it is determined that you abuse alcohol or drugs.
Sadly, in my research, there isn't much now, much like those problematic officers who have multiple complaints on their record. They are oftentimes just reissued to other departments, despite being problematic, despite actually being monitored to see if they have handled those things within their purview, and they're essentially just shipped to other areas. As we seen in Los Angeles, we had a very problematic Chief Beck, who's now being positioned in Chicago, one of the more violent and prevalent places as we're seeing right now. Everything is playing out. Would probably be the absolute worst place for him to be sent to, and yet he was redirected there. So unfortunately, as the police commissions and the boards are set up right now, they kind of just shuffle around instead of actually attacking and remedying the problems that plague their forces.
You know, those police officers have it better than judges. We get put off the bench for one mistake. We don't get transferred to another court. We get put off the bench. Go ahead.
I just want to add real quick. So that it brings me back to why the local elections are so important, specifically that of the district attorney, who has the prosecutorial power to hold local police departments accountable. I'll go ahead and say it, but Jackie Lacey, who's our DA in LA, has never held an LAPD officer accountable. In LA, we have the deadliest police force in America. Our officers kill more civilians than any other police department in America, by far. Even when we had a police chief who recommended that one of his officers be charged she refused to do it. She will refuse to do it. And as Mir mentioned, a lot of the time these officers get shuffled. They have police impunity. They can, they're in their own level of rights that, us as regular citizens do not have. So we have to think about local elections and who we're electing as our DA. I think about Breonna Taylor, who was murdered in her home. To this day, those officers have not been arrested. They are out there free. Why is that? The DA in that district will refuse to do that. So we really have to think about, if we want to think about police reform, who our district attorneys are. Are they willing to step up and do that? And that's why also local elections matter. So
yeah, and that's what we said about Ferguson. They replaced that prosecutor by voting. Your other question, Mayor? Your next question?
Yeah, this is actually a combined, two people asked this question. Tony, you might want to take it. How can one support equal justice now, and how does one get involved?
Great question. Go to our website, equaljusticenow.org. We have our upcoming events. In this time of pandemic, it's kind of hard for us to have, events live, but we're doing town halls just like this, and we have some upcoming ones. So we would love for people to get involved. I do also want to say this, that as it relates to the police, it's also important to change the policies and the procedures. I'm not going to talk against unions because I'm a member of a union, but the unions are more powerful, and they determine that officers, when they're fired, or when they get their jobs back, or when they get displaced to somewhere else, we have to begin to look at the unions and the policies that allow them to make this happen. That's just so important. A lot of times the district attorney's office is reluctant to prosecute a police officer because of the policy of the unions. I have a very good friend of mine that is a police officer, and I called him up and I asked him about some of the cases. And he said that, well, it's our policies, it's our procedures. He says if they had for instance, the gentleman in Atlanta, when they shot him in the back, if they had have just let him go, his chief would have probably fired him and let him go. So I think that we need to begin to get involved in some of the police, the policy and procedures. And the mayors, they control what happens to the chiefs and the policy and procedures. And we got to make them more active and get them more involved.
Tony makes a good point regarding the unions. Val Dennings, who is currently under consideration, she's a U.S. Congressman under consideration for vice president, led the impeachment process, was formerly the police chief of, she was the sheriff in the Orlando County, and her husband was police chief. Well, I was on a panel with her years ago, and she said that her hands were tied primarily because of the union agreement that they had, which allowed them to remain on the job when there's clear evidence that the officer had violated the law, and many other constraints that they have due to the union. Tony, how can we address that? Because doesn't the union negotiate with the police chief? Or tell us that process if you're aware of it.
A little bit of it. Well, I mean, when the contract is up for negotiation is when they negotiate their contracts. And
who does? With who? With the police chief?
Unions and the police chief. And
okay.
Some cities, they have panels that negotiate those contracts, but it's generally the police chief and the mayor that would sit down and negotiate the contract. And they're ironclad with those contracts. So it's kind of
they determine who they're going to endorse, and their endorsement typically counts for tens of thousands of votes. So we have to throw that element in as well. The unions, police unions, account for tens of thousands of votes, and it is politicians who are negotiating that contract with the police unions.
Very political.
Yeah. Vote once again.
That's right.
Mir, what we got next?
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. And I'm sure we want to get to final words. So there was actually one for Tai. How do home ownership programs like NACA really work?
So the Neighborhood Assistance Program. So what you do with those programs is you go through, I would probably assume it's a webinar now, but you get qualified. Are you ready to buy a house? You know, and what they do is they give you information on the steps. And once you go through all the steps, then you can apply for a down payment assistance program. But the first thing is, are you ready? Are you financially secure? Is it not going to hurt you? Is it not going to put you in a bad situation? They do work. They do work, but it's carved out for very few. I would say that somebody that wants to own a house should do their independent investigation, just as if they're wanting anything in life. You know, you're going to do your own research, but the pride of home ownership is very important to do your investigation. Rates right now are in the 2s. I don't know if you guys know that, but it's never been seen before. 30-year fix in the 2s. It's incredible, right? It's actually more expensive to rent than to own. And we need to educate all cultures to buy their land, to have the tax write-offs. Because if they don't have the tax write-offs, what are they doing? I mean, Judge Mathis, you can attest to this. You know, it's probably the best write-off you're ever going to have is having a home, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The mortgage and the property tax, I don't need to afford a mortgage, but that mortgage allows me to deduct the interest or the mortgage interest that I pay. So you're absolutely right. If nothing else, it's a tactic. Let's get to our final remarks from each panelist. I'm not saying a word. I have said enough, taken up all this time. And so we're going to ask who wants to go first with their final remarks. I'm going to ask that you all give a minute each. And if we have any more left, then we'll go back. Nobody wants to jump in. Nobody wants to be accused of taking over. There she is, my leader. Go ahead.
I just want to thank everybody again for having me in this conversation. We need more of these conversations, and I implore everyone to educate yourselves, to vote, to make good use of all of the resources that are available to you, especially during this time when we are in our homes. It's a great way to alleviate stress and to distract yourself from the fear mongering that's on the news channels. And we need each one of us. I think the biggest misnomer that is perpetuated out there is that your vote doesn't count. It does. The only things that have ever overturned history is the power of the people. So we need each and every one of you.
All right, let's go to our next person who wants to close. Trell, come on, man.
How you doing?
Stop playing.
No, I'm super thankful to share this space with everyone. So I want to say that first and foremost. My closing remarks is, you know, really just to build on what Amir was saying. We must vote. It is so important. We must know that our voices are valuable and that they matter. I would just harp on the ways that we can make sure that we're able to vote, right? We can get registered today, which we know we've heard rockthevote.org, we heard of vote.org, when we all vote. All of these websites are resources for us to get registered today. It doesn't take a long time, so you can do that right now. So I would encourage everybody to do that. Secondly, I would say check, because of the COVID of it all, right? We want to make sure that we're able to vote safely. So check and make sure that you can register right now and what the laws are in your state to absentee vote. That is the safest way to vote by mail. And then the third thing that I would say is, I mentioned the HEROES Act earlier, which has been sitting on Senator Mitch McConnell's desk for way too long, but it includes tons of funding, trillions of dollars of funding, including $3.6 billion that will ensure that the voting process is more seamless. So I would encourage you right now to go to andstillivote.org/heroes and sign the petition. We got 20,000 signatures on the petition within the first week, and that led to a meeting with Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, which gave us more leverage with the senators. So if you think the petitions don't matter, they do. If you think your vote doesn't matter, it does. So please just things that will take 2 to 3 minutes of your time. Do them. They matter. You matter. Our voices matter. That's what I'll say.
Let me go to the Harvard man with the common hand. Tai?
Oh, we got me again. First off, you know, I think I've learned something from each one of you guys. And, you know, I've taken notes, mental notes. But I think the main thing is what I've learned from you guys is we got to be proactive. Everything that we do, we have to think about it clearly and make the right decisions. Right now, we all have decisions and we have to act upon them. And I think that what you guys have told me, I'm going to probably tell 3 or 4 people, you know, and it's about being proactive and actually doing it, not just speaking about it. And I think a lot of people, you know, what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, this is a great conversation, but no, we have to act upon it. So I want to say thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed this, and I think we should definitely do it more often. So
thank you. We're going to go to our convener right after Andrew. Andrew is last because he came last. Andrew, give us your final remarks.
And apologies, I was behind. I'm still learning technology, so.
But in court, we lock you up when you come to the courtroom late. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to finish off by saying thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to implore everybody to make a plan to vote. Make a plan to vote. In the past, the way my grandmother voted, they had something, we still have it today, it was called Souls to the Polls. That was when you would go from church right to the voting booth. Today, you don't necessarily need to go to church right to the voting booth. If you want to, that's fine. But the point is, make a plan, figure out how you're going to get there, call your county recorder's office, and then look into what's on your ballot. All the propositions, there's 21. Look at your local races. We talked about district attorney holding police accountable. There's an assortment of ways at the federal level. We have the HEROES Act that was mentioned. We have the BREATHE Act that's going to look to reform policing. Also, just call your representatives, get to know them. You know, my friend, Representative Karen Bass here in South LA, she'd be happy to talk to you. She'd be happy to hear from you. Get to know them. It's not a burden. That's why they're there, to hear from you, to connect with you. Call Karen Bass's office, get to know her, say hello. If you're in LA, call Marquise Harris Dawson, say hello, introduce yourself. Call whoever, Mark Ridley Thomas, your county supervisor, get to know these folks. They will help you in getting to know information, resources, and also what you should be paying attention to. So on that, I'll leave it, and thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Wrap it up, Tony. Show.
I think you're muted. Tony.
Tony, you're muted, brother.
There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can't hear you.
I said all this.
How's that for sign language? Go ahead. Oh, I don't want to offend the hearing challenge. Go ahead.
I first want to thank you all for coming out today, because there's other places you guys could have been doing other things. Mir, Tai, Trell, Andrew, thank you so much. Judge Mathis, thank you so much. You did a great job. Really appreciate you for doing this. This is important. You know, this is why we started Equal Justice Now. You know, because we felt it was important to educate people. You know, you don't have to give them such, educate them, nudge them in the right direction. It's so important. You'd be surprised, you know, that people, the reason why they don't vote, because they think their vote doesn't count. You know, in our last few elections, that's been proven to be wrong. So thank you so much. Please get involved, equaljusticenow.org. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We're out here for you guys. Thank you.
All right, folks. And with that, good day to everyone. We'll see you on the next panel.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Guess we leave.